Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of BassFan Up Close. I'm your host, Todd Seisner, editor of BassFan.com. Today, we are continuing with our Bass Day Ever series, in which pro anglers take us back to the most significant single day of their tournament careers. For those of you who've turned in to the first few episodes, you've been treated to some really interesting stories about how a single day can shape a career, and I'm really stoked to dive into the next conversation with today's guest. Those who follow the sport know Mike Iaconelli's mantra is to never give up. Well, as I've come to know Mike, not only does he never give up, he never slows down. When he's not chasing bass on MLF's Bass Pro Tour, he's working on any number of projects he's involved with. He's the co-founder of Bass University, host of the Ike Live podcast, heads up the Ike Foundation with his wife, Becky, so they can make fishing accessible to kids in urban communities. He's a former Bassmaster Angler of the Year, a Bassmaster Classic champion, a winner of 8 BASS tournaments, an FLW Tour winner, a 2-time MLF Cup winner. Mike has pretty much seen it all, done it all, and often screamed about it all at the top of his lungs over the course of a career. Michael, I'd like to welcome you to our Bass Day Ever series. I hope you and your family are doing well. Some unprecedented times we're living through right now. So I haven't given anything away, Michael, about which day we're going to be talking about here in our chat, but you've told me you've wrestled over 2 particular days for this conversation. And since there's really no rules for this series, I figured what the heck, if it's that tough to boil it down, let's hear about them both.
That sounds good to me.
All right,
Absolutely.
So first day you mentioned, August 3rd, 2003. Day 3, Bassmaster Classic, Louisiana Delta, New Orleans, Louisiana. Give me some context here. What's going on in your life, and why is that final day of that classic one of your best days ever?
When you look back 20 years, there's so many days that were important, but this one, the Philadelphia tournament, stick out as the 2 biggest. 2003, when I look back and look at what led up to that day, it wasn't all roses. It wasn't all positive. It was a lot of other stuff going on. I was ready to leave the sport. I had actually honestly made a decision in my mind that that classic was going to be the last tournament I fished. And there were a couple reasons. The one is it was still early enough in my career where I wasn't established yet. I had some sponsorships, but for sure, at that early in your career, nothing is concrete. There's still anxiety, there's still financial stress. So that was part of it. My uncle at the time was sort of battling the backside of battling stage 4 cancer. Mm-hmm. That was looming still in my mind. And then the big one, was that I was going through a really tough personal situation in my life, which was a divorce, going through a divorce with my first wife. Again, looking back on it, it seems irrational, my mindset, but my mindset going through that. And I think a lot of people that deal with divorce or loss, your instinct is you want to throw blame on something. And at that point, I had blamed, all the bad things that have happened, including this failed relationship. I was blaming it on fishing, So, going in, I was mentally not in a great place going into that tournament. And I had made up my mind that this was going to be the last event I fished. And I was going to go in a different direction. I'm not kidding you when I say this. I had literally filed all the paperwork to go back to school. Okay. I was going to go back to Rowan, and I was going to go back and get my teaching certificate. So I already had my degree, but I was going to enroll back in Rowan to get my teaching certificate. And that, I honestly was going through the motions of, my life's going to change. I'm going to fish this last tournament, fall semester. I'm going back to Rowan, and I'm going to do the next best thing. I'm going to start over. I'm going to be an educator, which I love to teach then, and I still love to teach now. And I'll get to fish, in the summers. And I was in that place, and that's where I was mentally. And, then the tournament rolls around, and, I have a great first day. Second day, I have this unbelievable second day. And, as it's happening, I don't think I really, I don't even think I realized still that, man, I'm going to win this tournament. And how will that change my life? I was still man, this is the last tournament I'm ever fishing. I want to go out with a bang. I want to try my hardest. That was sort of my mindset. It wasn't anything but that.
Right.
And then, we got to that last day, and the fishing got tougher, progressively tougher every day.
Mm-hmm.
You got to remember back then the tournaments were in August. They were summertime tournaments. They were hot.
Right.
My tide was an hour later every day. So I was losing good water. Mm-hmm. And I knew how close the weights were. If I look back, I want to say there were several guys, probably 5, maybe 6, that all had a legitimate shot to win going that last day. It wasn't a blowout. I can almost, as I'm talking to you, I almost close my eyes and remember. I know it was a long time ago, but I can remember, knowing. And this is a hard thing to describe, but internally whether you have enough or not, right? Mm-hmm. It's not like MLF is now. We were on the Louisiana Delta. We were spread out over, hundreds of miles.
Right.
I had no idea what my competitors had. But deep down inside, I knew that I didn't have enough, gone into the very last portion of the day. And then you throw all the other stuff into the mix. We launched out of Bayou Signet, mm-hmm. and the route that I took wasn't quite 2.5 hours, but it was about 2 hours and 15 minutes one way. So, all this is going through my head now, right? And I have to stop and get gas. Mm-hmm. You have to throw that into the equation. The route itself, I actually went out into the Gulf of Mexico and then back in. So, there's that anxiety of that route because there's big water, there's oyster. So all this, I can remember going through my head, and I'm like, God, this isn't enough. I've got 3 good ones. Mm-hmm. I've got 1 okay one, and I had a 12-incher, like mm-hmm. one that I had to work. And the great thing about, the way this played out this particular day is that I had a camera guy with me that last day, and he knew our time. And I remember, looking at my watch and God, I got like 5 minutes left and I got to go. Right. And he knew. So he was smart enough to prompt the question, and I remember, so, and then the guy, he's got his big giant JM camera, 150-pound camera sitting on his shoulder. And he prompts the question. He goes, Mike, I know we got to leave here in a couple minutes. Give me a recap of the day. And I remember, this is the craziest thing. I remember like talking about it, like, man, we tried, we pushed, I did everything I could do. That last day I mixed it up a little. I threw a frog a little. I did other stuff to try to catch a good one. Like, I said, man, that's all I could do. I worked my hardest. I said, I know I'm going to probably be a little short, but man, we worked hard. I said, we got a couple minutes. I'm going to keep casting until the very end. I'm just going to keep work. And as I'm talking, mm-hmm. I'm fishing one of the primary baits for me that week was a swim worm or a speed worm, basically a paddle tail worm with a cut tail, a little 1/8 ounce weight at the head of it. And I remember literally in conversation, like, we're just going to keep fishing. We're just a couple minutes left, just going to cast to the end and then just let the chips fall. And I was like almost just at the end of the sentence. And I remember one boiling on it and like literally I never felt it, but just behind the bait, I saw this big boil and then time stopped. And then that's where something kicks in internally. Mm-hmm. It's almost like you turn into a robot for a second. I stopped talking without thinking about it. I burned that thing in as fast as I could. And I don't even remember looking at the other rod. It's like that instinctive. And I had another rod with a soft stick bait, a Senko style lure. And I remember never taking my eyes off the boil and somehow grabbing that rod, and that was actually on a spinning rod, and like a robot, just click the bail back, perfect cast, land it right where you can still see that little ripple, and setting the hook. And then, that's where,
I got out of hand.
It got out of hand because I think what happened is I think I held my breath. I was like, and reeling this fish in. And the interesting thing is, about halfway back to the boat, it got caught in a big patch of milfoil. And I remember that. I remember it getting snagged, and I thought, oh my God, but the whole time this fish is on, And I think I was saying it. I said, this is the winning fish. This is the winning fish. This is, and again, I had no idea. I didn't know what Gary Klein caught at Timmy Horton, Roland Martin, Mark Menendez, any of those guys that were in the hunt. I had no idea what they caught, but somewhere deep down inside, I knew that was the winning fish. Once he got out of that clump of milfoil, it was the strangest thing, but he almost came right to me. Like I put my hand down on the water and he came right to me open mouth and I got him. I think for me and for a lot of people that can relate to that situation where you're under all that pressure and you're pushing and you're trying, is when I landed that fish and got him in the boat. You know, that was a moment that was captured on film. It's in my mind, but for a lot of people, they can go back and watch that. And
no, it's one of the iconic sequences of the sport. And yeah, the magic of TV. If that camera's not in the boat with you, you know, all we're relying on is your version of it. But to have it on film is, you know, it'll live forever. So
it's unbelievable. And that single fish catch, you know, was a life-changing moment. That day, that 15-second, 20-second fight, whatever it wasn't very long. I mean, it changed my life. And when I landed that fish, I did a little recap, put it in a live well, and we went. And I made it back. I remember making it back. I think I might have had 5 minutes to spare on the backside. I remember the stress and the pressure. But, you know, that day, that fish, that winning the Classic instantly changed my life. And I know it sounds ridiculous to have, you know, already made up in my mind that it was over, but it was the thing that made me realize that the reason I wanted to leave the sport, it was all wrong. Blaming everything on fishing. Everything good in my life was because of fishing. And it really woke my career up, but it also woke my life up. Honestly, I can tell you that day, that fish winning the Classic, it's hard to look back and say what if, but it did change my life. It changed my life, you know? And totally.
And I think the school systems in South Jersey are probably in better shape now, huh?
You're right. After trying to educate my 7 and 9-year-old in quarantine, I think they are in a better place without me as an educator. Yeah.
Well, that's an awesome story. And yeah, Mike, you know, I think that fish, just to recap, Mike, that gave you just about 11 pounds that day, 10-14, enough to beat Gary Klein by just over a pound there in New Orleans. And the rest is history. So
yeah, it was.
Yeah, folks, obviously, folks who haven't seen it should get themselves over to YouTube and find the clip of Mike landing that bass that ultimately clinched the win. After hearing your version of why it mattered so much, you'll appreciate his reaction that much more. So, let's shift some gears here, Mike. Let's shift to more modern times. 11 years later here. Take us back to the summer of 14. Bass decides to bring an Elite Series event to, of all places, Philadelphia, your backyard, the Delaware River. This was a home game for you. What was it like kind of knowing the pressure you would probably be under for that Delaware River tournament?
And I think the Classic prior to that event, I didn't have a great Classic. And I'll be honest with you, I think I was mad at myself for not having a great Classic. And I remember getting on the Classic stage and saying something to the effect that, you know, watch out when they come to Philly, I'm going to win that tournament. So I doomed myself even more, right? I even dumped a ton more pressure on myself, but it was a special event. I knew it was going to be special, but it was a lot of pressure. It was the place that I grew up fishing, like literally. And I mean, not bass tournament fishing, but fishing. One of the first places I ever cast a rod and reel was the Schuylkill River in Philadelphia with my uncle and my grandfather on the tidal side of the Schuylkill River. So it felt special. This is the one you got to win. My fans will be there, my family, people that I've competed with my whole life at the club level. And, you know, it's home turf. And deep down inside, I knew that this would be a one and done. Most likely, you know, they'll probably never come back. So in saying that, you know, I did prepare. I can be on the river in about 35 minutes from where I live. I did put in time before the official cutoff. I did my research, as did a lot of other guys. And I had a ton of history, which I know from watching, you know, other guys on their home turf can be the gift or it can be the curse, right?
Mm-hmm.
It can be the gift or it can be the curse. You throw into that this tournament, and they didn't know when they scheduled it. It just fell that way, but they scheduled it during a week of a supermoon, which on a tidal fishery, it's like throwing in, you know, a whole nother negative element of making it even harder, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Your tides on a supermoon are exaggerated. So your lows are lower, your highs are higher.
Mm-hmm.
And even for a guy that knows a tidal place, when you have a supermoon, it throws a lot of stuff out the window. So
right.
The first day of the tournament, day one, didn't go very good for me. It did not go as planned. And it's a little bit of that, you know, too much. I think a little bit of that happened. But in all reality, I misjudged the tides the first day. And I can't remember exactly, but I want to say I had about 8 pounds.
9 pounds, 2 ounces, which then leads us into the next day, which is the day that you want to really focus on here. Day 2, you come in with 15.1 and kind of take over the show. Yeah.
9 pounds the first day. I think it was in the 20s, maybe somewhere. And, you know, a lot of bigger weights than what I expected, especially Boyd Duckett.
Mm-hmm.
I think he weighed 17 something,
right.
which, you know, on the Delaware, that's a mega bag in the summer. It's a mega bag. It's unheard of. And, you know, you start second guessing yourself. But the second day was one of those days. And a lot of listeners will think about their own fishing experiences, and they have had a day like this.
Yep.
The entire day, from when they called my boat number to I weighed in, it was like an out of body experience. It's the best way I can describe it. Going through the day, feeling like you're looking down
mm-hmm.
at yourself fishing, making decisions and making moves. And the second day I decided to start downriver instead of upriver and get ahead of the tides instead of behind them. And that was the biggest decision in that tournament for me. And it was also probably one of the biggest decisions in my career,
mm-hmm.
period, to change gears and get ahead of the tide. From that point on, but especially that second day, it was one of those days where you couldn't make a bad move. Like the place I started was good. My second spot was good. I was in a creek and I got this feeling, this overwhelming feeling after the tide switched that I needed to get back out to the main river. And I went out to the main river and caught a few. And
mm-hmm.
all of a sudden, before I know it, I've got 11.5 pounds, which on the Delaware is so good.
Yeah.
And from the first day literally being down in the dumps. And then that second day, the way things evolved, it was unbelievable. The moment really that changed it for me was I had that 11 pounds and the tide was now getting high. It was about halfway up and incoming, which in tidal water, once it gets there and higher, you're pretty much done. I had this thought to go to a barge that I fished a lot in the past that was good for a fish or two during this tide. The way this old submerged barge was laid out,
mm-hmm.
It's an incoming tide spot, and you needed the water high because the fish actually got inside of the barge on the inside.
All right.
So I remember having this feeling like, God, I got a great weight. I need to go to this barge. And so I'm making these runs, and this wasn't a short run. This was like a long run to
mm-hmm.
get there. And I pulled in there and I made that throw into the barge, into the metal with 17 or 20 pound fluorocarbon
mm-hmm.
with a missile mini flip jig. And I remember setting the hook and just, and I could feel him and he's stuck. My experience in this barge, if you get 2 or 3 bites, you might land one. You're going to break them off. You're going to lose them. And I remember just fighting and he's not moving. I can't get any leverage. I can't get any ground. And finally I sort of, and I have spectators watching me. Finally, I sort of like give up and I get over top of this fish and, you know, and he's just not even fighting anymore. It's just heavy weight. And I'm like, God, that one got me. There's still more barge to fish. So I said, let me just pull on it, you know? Mm. And I remember pulling on it and I pulled on it. I felt it come free, like, but there was weight on there. Mm-hmm. And I looked down as I pulled on it. I'm right over top of it. over the barge, some over the old gunnel of the barge. And I remember pulling on it and looking down, and I see a fish. I see a mouth.
Yeah.
And I hand lined this fish, and that was so exhausted that wasn't fighting. And it was a 3-pound class fish on the Delaware. I landed that fish, and I went on to get 4 more bites in that barge, and I landed every one. I called every fish out but 2. And that moment, during that second day, it was the turning point for me, because it was like that experience. It was a confidence boost. I started making right. I didn't feel like I could do anything wrong. When you start landing fish that you shouldn't land, and it was the turning point. Day 2 was the turning point for me in that tournament. The reason I want to talk about this, the reason that this is in my choice of number 2 for me, is it was a big elite win. And for sure, it probably is not as big or important to people as the Classic or as an Angler of the Year or a Federation National Championship or any of that. But this was home. This was home turf. It had such a meaning to me, being the place that I learned how to fish. The last day of that event, I ended up running up the Schuylkill and fished a spot. I didn't catch any, but I fished a spot within eyesight of the place that I first fished as a kid. It all that was so emotional for me. And to have, your family and your friends and fans and your peers there, and people I fished top rod Bassmasters with, people I fished as an amateur behind, and all these people and the crowd. I don't ever remember feeling that sense of energy that I felt there at Philadelphia.
Yeah, that scene was just, I guess, incredible is really the only way to put it. I mean, you crowd surfed, right, at the end when you won the thing?
It was incredible. I took the trophy out into the crowd, and, Philly fans are rabid.
Yep.
And the energy that was there, it was one of those experiences that is just, it has a special place in my career.
Yep. Only angler that tournament to crack 40 pounds. He wound up with 47.14 to win. I don't think anybody's going to quibble with you going over both those days. 2 amazingly personal stories about, 2 magnificent fishing days and a highly decorated career, Michael. I really appreciate you taking the time today to take us through them.
It was my pleasure. I loved reliving them. I loved rehashing them. I hope everybody enjoyed it. And if my tournament career was to end today, those 2 days really have made my career, and
Well, here's hoping it won't be long before we have a couple more days like that out there on the water. But for the folks watching, we want to hear your Bass Day Ever stories. Log on to our social media channels or drop us a note in our feedback section on BassFan. But for Mike Iaconelli and the team at BassFan, I'm Todd Seisner, and may your next day on the water be your Bass Day Ever.